Hello, nerds! This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby! And I'm your host, Liv, here with the last episode of the year. Or the last new episode of the year, I should say. Like I mentioned last time, I will be taking the next 2 weeks off to chill out a little bit. Or, as it's looking right now, to work my day job every single day until the new year. It's fun. In January, though, we are going to begin our saga on Virgil's Aeneid. That's right, another epic to be covered. But the thing about the Aeneid is, it's Roman. It's also from considerably later than Homer and all the Greek playwrights that we've covered in the past. This makes it really different and fascinating to cover. Of course, it's also written in Latin, which is another major difference, but one I won't focus too much on because I don't read Latin or ancient Greek, so who's to say? Personally, though, I'm honestly really psyched to cover the Aeneid. I've never read it before. I was supposed to in a Roman literature class, but the prof was kind of a lot, and I bought the wrong translation by accident, and so somehow I actually got away with just not reading it for the entire semester and still got a decent grade. Lazy undergrad Liv. But in preparation for said Aeneid, over the next couple weeks when I'm taking a break, I'm just going to be re-airing a couple of relevant episodes from the Iliad, the story that precedes the Aeneid and is pretty relevant when we dive right in. You'll remember I talked about Aeneas a few times, if not just straight up a bunch of times, during the Iliad. We'll talk about the history and the vast differences between the time frames during which these were written, but listening to these episodes on the Iliad will give you a nice little primer, a good reminder about some of the content while I'm taking a much-needed break. So you can remind yourselves of the crazy Trojan War just in time for a story that sets itself right after the war. But that's for later. Today's episode is me answering your questions, both the mythological and relevant, and the many that you sent in about my love of wine. You know me so well. This is episode 68, Medusa, Feminism, and Wine, an end-of-year Q&A. Okay, we're diving right in. I've put these into some contextual kind of sections in my list of questions. So we'll start with some about the general mythology, some of the things you guys had to ask. Here's a question. Are there more stories that explain the origin of things you haven't told us? These are this person's favorite. Yes, absolutely. Can I name any offhand? No. Will I eventually be able to cover them? Definitely. Are they kind of hard to figure out? There's not like a list of, all the different Greek stories that explain natural phenomena, but eventually, we'll get through them all. Those ones are so much fun, like Narcissus and the Echo and, the feathers of the peacock being the eyes of Argus. Those are my favorite. There are definitely more. This is kind of how a lot of early peoples discovered things, or the way they explained those things around them was through mythology. So there are definitely more, and they will come up. Next, do I believe in the myths, or do I think that that's all they are? I want to believe. I do think that's all they are, but I desperately want to believe. But at the same time, it's like, I think we'd know it if, a family of freaks were up in the sky just fucking with us all the time. That'd be cool, though. Wouldn't it? Anyway, who's the biggest dickhead in Greek mythology, in my opinion? Great question. I do think it's Zeus. I think it's pretty clear. Depends on what kind of dickhead you're talking about. As we just discussed, Jason is a real fucking asshole, but he's kind of a darker version, where you're actually really dangerous and awful. And Zeus is, but not in the same way. It's kind of in that way. The way they took it certainly was he was kind of benign. You would probably get raped, but it wasn't considered the way it is now. It was bad, but not kind of when Zeus did it, no one was ever kind of ruined or scarred for life. It just kind of was oh, that's a thing Zeus is going to do, and maybe you're going to have a demigod child because of it. In my opinion, what modern-day importance is inferred from the reading and analysis of mythology? So much. Do I have more to say? Definitely. I don't know. I mean, I think it's fascinating. I personally love the history of it, the idea that these are things that for the most part people believed, or they kind of used it to help themselves through the world that was sort of that they couldn't understand themselves, Like, I think it's a way to understand how early people figured things out and how they adapted and sort of how we got to where we are now. I kind of wish that polytheism had continued on in more importance over the planet than it did, just because, I mean, I don't want to say it was less problematic, but, Christianity did some shit. Is Circe actually a goddess? Yes, no, kind of. The term goddess is really broad. It sometimes is used to describe anyone who was magical, in whatever kind of way, or had powers of those things. I think technically, yes. I'm just thinking about it. I think technically yes, but then she was also a witch goddess because she was the daughter of Helios, or the granddaughter of Helios, the daughter of Aeetes. I think that makes her a goddess because Helios was a Titan. But again, it's just kind of, it was never like a hard and fast rule. That's sort of an answer to a lot of things about Greek mythology. Somebody asked me once, like, how did it all start? And there really isn't an answer for that because it just evolved over so much time. And, very early people started by believing one thing, but they didn't write anything down. They couldn't. And then that evolved and changed. And eventually people were writing things down. And so, it just kind of evolved like that. And there's no hard and fast rule or hard and fast facts about when anything started or sort of the truth behind anything. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating, but also kind of frustrating. Like, you just want to know, the real story, but there was no real story. Can I make an episode about male revenge versus female revenge in Greece? That sounds like a great idea, and I would absolutely like to. It's going on my list. If I could go and actually see one myth, silent observer style, which would it be? Oh, would that I could. How amazing would that be to be able to go back and witness something like this? Like, holy shit, absolutely, I would love to do that. Could you imagine? It's bananas. Anyway, which one though? Like, I think it depends on how I'm feeling in the moment. Like, do I want to watch Heracles defeat some totally bananas monsters? Do I want to see Pegasus and Bellerophon kill the Chimera? That would be fucking cool. Do I want to, spy on Achilles and Patroclus? Like, maybe not. That seems like a bit of a invasion of privacy, but or do I want to just watch Athena fuck with shit? Hera fuck with shit? Anyway, I don't know. I can't pick one. That would be amazing, though. It's just a life goal, I think. Definitely an attainable life goal. Okay, let's jump into a few questions about me/wine, because that is a full category I had to make because so many of you asked about wine and I really love it. So start from the top. How much wine do I go through when writing an episode? Okay, let's defend myself a little bit here. 1, I usually drink a beer while I'm writing an episode. And that's usually later, like sort of towards the end of the episode, because I'll be honest, guys, I am a morning person. And so on the day that I usually devote to writing an episode, I wake up at like 7:30, I clean my kitchen, I sit down to write. So I'm writing by like 8 a.m. and usually I'm like nearing being finished. I've gotten pretty quick at it now, thankfully, but I'm nearing being finished by like 1 or 2. And so maybe I'll have a beer then, or maybe I'll have like a beer while I'm recording an episode. As much as I love beer and wine, like I don't drink that much while I'm doing it. All right, next. Will I be back in Toronto soon? I mean, soon is relative. I do have to go to the Toronto area this coming summer because I have a collection of friends getting married. Actually, a weirdly large number of friends getting married in a small amount of time. So I'll definitely be in Toronto. So maybe I will plan to do something again. And maybe I will plan it better this time because I know that people will actually show up, which is very cool. What is my favorite myth? Oh, I'm asked that all the time. And I always say that I can't pick one, but then I also always hear myself then talk about how like Medusa's my favorite, or like Cadmus and Harmonia are my favorite. So I think it's just that I have too many favorites. It depends on the moment, depends what I want to talk about. Medusa is definitely one of my favorites in terms of characters. She's incredible and fascinating. And another question is just basically about, can we talk about her badassery? And yes, I have every intention of talking more about Medusa. I want to do another episode where I kind of delve even a little bit deeper, examine other roots of her story, other versions of it. I want to talk about Medusa forever, so that's definitely in the works. And so, she's definitely one of my favorites, absolutely. Cadmus and Harmonia are a favorite of mine because I think they're kind of an underserved couple in Greek mythology. They're fascinating. They founded Thebes together. Cadmus killed a dragon and he planted his teeth, and people grew out of that. That's always really cool when people grow out of teeth in the ground. I think I have favorites, and it just always depends on how I'm feeling at any given moment about what I will decide is my favorite. Ambrosia or nectar? Nectar, I think. Because I think it'd be more like wine. There's a connection here. Besides Madeline Miller's mythological novels, which would I recommend? I've talked about this one before, but I will say it again. The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes. It is beautiful. It is really fascinating. It is a very sympathetic look at the story of Jocasta and Oedipus and their children. Definitely from the perspective of like, none of them knew what they were doing was wrong. And so how fascinating is it to kind of address the story from the fact that like nobody set out to have an incestuous relationship, and how does one deal with an accidental incestuous relationship. Anyway, The Children of Jocasta, Natalie Haynes, that's amazing. Obviously Madeline Miller's books, but we talked about that all the time. The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, that's a fascinating story, a look at the Iliad from the perspective of Briseis. Anyway, I could go on. There's a pinned story on my Instagram of a shit ton of books, and you should all go look there. Another about wine. What is my favorite wine? What is my go-to wine? And a favorite snack to pair it with? Those were two different questions because many people ask me about wine. My all-time favorite wine is one that actually you can only get, or I don't know how far you can get it, but it's from the interior of BC. It's called Sovereign Opal, which is like a crazy name for a grape that you basically can't get anywhere else. I learned it's very good. It's nice. It's a nice white, crisp, little sweet, not too sweet, tart as well. I'm going to talk more about wine. I did learn that in Athens, I really like a Moschofilero. That's a Greek white wine that's quite good as well. I do like a red in the evenings, in the wintry seasons, the fall seasons, when it's a little colder, you want a nice red. I like a Cabernet Sauvignon. I like a Syrah. I like wine. I like wine that is cheap, but not too cheap. Get an aerator, make that shit taste better. And my favorite snack to pair it with. Guys, my favorite thing in the world is to just buy like a baguette, a big tub of tzatziki, a big tub of olives and feta. My favorite was from the Loblaws Olive Bar in Toronto. We don't have Loblaws in Victoria, which is a travesty, if only for the olive bar. And I take it home and I just dip everything, put olives on there, feta on there with my wine, and that is the world's best food. Here's one I wish I could answer. What job opportunities are there in the classics and mythology field? Unfortunately, I'm proof of I have no idea. I took my classics degree alongside my English degree. I did a double major. I had every intention of using my English degree and not using my classics degree. The classics was because I fucking love this shit, as I say weekly. It was just because I wanted to learn more about ancient Greece and Rome and the mythology. I just wanted to learn it. I didn't really have any intention of using it. I did take that degree because I'd started writing this novel that I'm finally finishing. And then I wanted to just learn more about it. But I had every intention of using my English degree, and I did for a bit before no longer using that degree, and then somehow finding this way of using my classics degree. So I really hope that there's a lot of job opportunities. I have a feeling not. It's hard with a lot of those arts kind of worlds. Like, I used to work in publishing, and there's almost no job opportunities, at least in Canada, when it comes to publishing. It's really fucking tough. I hope classics is better, but I honestly don't know. I wish I did. But you can also find creative ways of using those degrees like I did. I really never thought I'd use it, and then here I am. I've got a weekly time to just use my degree and chat with you nerds over the internet. That is a very cool thing. So there are ways to use degrees if you want to. You just figure them out and have fucking fun. Who are some of my all-time favorite gods? Great question. I mean, I love Athena. I know I talk about her being problematic, and she is, but she's problematic because of the patriarchy, not because of some inherent thing to do with Athena's personality. I love Cadmus and Harmonia, but they are who my book is about, which is why I love them and how I learned so much about them. I obviously love Odysseus. He's not a god, but I love him anyway. I like the idea of Ares, even though he has minimal stories. I like him and Aphrodite together because they have a really bizarre relationship where they were together, but they weren't together. She was married to Hephaestus, but the mythology proves pretty clearly that if she loved anyone, it was Ares and not Hephaestus. And they have that great story that I told in the Aphrodite episode about Hephaestus trying to catch them together. It is dramatic and crazy. So I really like them as a couple. They're fascinating. They're also Harmonia's parents together as a couple, which is part of why I like them. I mean, I could go on. It's one of those things. Everyone I love, it just comes to me in the moment when I love them. Those are my go-tos, though. Aphrodite is why I started loving Greek mythology, that and Cupid and Psyche. All to say, Aphrodite, I think, is one of the number ones. Certainly Athena. Definitely Cadmus and Harmonia. Cadmus, though, is a hero. God, guys, I just love all of them. I don't want to pick, because what I love is the mythology. What I love is the existence of these stories, the fact that they happened, the fact that people believed this and developed these stories over decades and centuries, and the fact that an entire society was built around the concepts of these deities and these stories. That is what I love so desperately. How old am I? Where do I live? What was my major? I answered the major question earlier. This was a very, very personal question. I am 31. I live on the island of Vancouver. Vancouver Island. Vancouver is not on it. I did used to live in Vancouver. And my major was classics. Here is another personal one. All right. Since I am such a queer advocate, a very nice thing to say, thank you, do I identify as LGBTQ or queer? This person does state, if I don't feel like addressing it, that's okay, and I appreciate that. I don't mind addressing it. I am a straight, cisgendered woman. I just, believe that everyone should be able to live their lives how they want and how they identify, and that they should just be able to do that without anyone fucking with them or being assholes about it. All right. A Medusa-specific question that I will address outside of the fact that I have every intention of doing another episode about her. Can Medusa only turn men to stone, or women also? The idea the person is getting at here is the theory that comes up in memes here and there, that Athena was protecting Medusa by cursing her. This is fascinating. I do think it's a bit of projection, or possibly a bit of maybe, women from ancient Greece putting their own spin on things somehow kind of getting that into the zeitgeist. I'm not totally sure what the intention was then. I do think the idea that it's a curse that's actually protection is fascinating. We don't know whether, as far as I know, I should say, I'm not certain about this. We don't know, though, whether Medusa could turn women to stone, because I did mention this in the podcast I did of Next Door Villain about Medusa, that the stories are all about men turning to stone because they went to try to kill her. So the stories we have are about men turning to stone, but that is because men would be the ones that would try to go to kill her. Women would never just go seek out Medusa, whether to befriend her or to kill her. Either way, just women didn't have that role in ancient Greece. They were expected to stay in the homes, in their own circles. They didn't get to just do whatever they wanted, which is of course part of the problem that I rage about all the time. They wouldn't have had that opportunity. So unless, a goddess or something went to try to speak with Medusa, we wouldn't know. And that's not part of the story. So the answer is she only turned men to stone, but that's not to say that she could only turn men to stone. I do like the idea that Athena was helping her, was protecting her from further trauma by cursing her in the way she did. I don't know how much grounding that has in the history and the mythology, but I love the idea of it. And like I said, I'll talk about that more in the future. I do want to cover this incredible character even more than I already have. All right, jumping up to some questions people had on podcasting in general. What tech do I use to make the podcast? I am a low-tech person. While only 31, sometimes feel like I'm much older in my abilities. I'm like one of those people that understands the internet well, but not necessarily like the technology behind it, if that makes any sense. All to say, I use a Blue Yeti microphone. It is fairly affordable as far as microphones go and seems to work well. My audio, to me, always sounds great. No one's complaining, so I just keep going. I use the program Audacity to edit it. I did learn everything I know via just Googling. I do not edit well, nor with any kind of technological knowledge. I just cut and paste and the like and think, hey, that sounds okay. That should work. Do I use a website like Anchor to record and edit? No, I didn't know that was a thing. Like I just said, I use Audacity, which was a free program that Google suggested, and it works. What is the most difficult part of starting a podcast? I think that's just the actual doing it. Like anything hard and stressful, the actually just sitting down and doing it. Most of it you can learn online. There's lots of like different little ins and outs to kind of get yourself out everywhere. But even to just go onto iTunes, it's really easy. You just kind of have to sit yourself down and do it. Of course, you need to have the content and the recording ability and all that. But ultimately, it didn't take much for me to learn how to do it and to just put it out there. There are things I would do differently if I started now knowing what I know, but I'm also glad that I just sat down and was like, do this thing. It's incredibly rewarding when you do it and when you find your people, the people who want to listen to you in whatever way you're doing it. I mean, in my case, it's ranting and raving about myths and the idea that there are so many of you out there who want to listen to me do it and to interact and to chat about it online and stuff is honestly one of the coolest, most incredible things that's ever happened to me. Any other collab podcasts in the pipeline? Yes. Should I leave it there? Yes, definitely some coming down the pipe or the pike. Would I make a vodcast, which is a word I don't know, but I imagine means video podcast. This person wants non-English speakers to know me, and those could be subtitled, which thank you so much for wanting non-English speakers to know me. Video makes me really uncomfortable, so no. I have a hard enough time capturing myself on video on Instagram or anything like that for like 30 seconds. Maybe one day I'll be more comfortable with it, but even just having a setup like that is just not something that I am really prepared to do or super interested in. I love the idea of more people being able to listen to me, but it's just not in the works. But thank you. Okay, back to the mythology. Hades and Hadestown. Have I seen or heard Hadestown? How many of you asked me about it? A great many. I haven't. I know I should. And I think that all of you pushing me here will lead me to figure out, I don't know, do I just listen to the soundtrack? Can I Google something? I will Google it. I will figure it out, and I will talk about it in a future episode. I promise. About Hades himself, though, we had some questions. Do I consider Hades to be a villain or just an anti-hero who needed to be given more love in his early life? I like that. I don't think he's either. I think that the very recent culture has put a lot of stock in Hades. He was not much to the ancient Greeks. I mean, the underworld was really important and Hades was there. You know, he controlled it, but he was not anyone's real priority back then, unless I'm very much mistaken. I mean, I'm not super familiar with Hades' cult, if he had one, but I honestly don't even think he had one. Like, he was an Olympian, but he was not very... He wasn't like worshipped. He wasn't super important other than his role in the underworld. So I think that the sort of interest in him is very recent, which is why I don't think he was a villain or an anti-hero. I think he was just the king of the underworld. You know, he was just the guy who ran the underworld with Persephone. I do think he was villainous in his abduction of Persephone. That's fucked. Like, it's not a good story. But I think that he, as a person, is neither. He is not a villain. He is not an anti-hero. He is just a minor character, I'm sorry to say. He was just there, doing his thing. I think he's pretty benign, is kind of my answer. Had some really interesting questions about history, too, so let's delve into those. Do I think Homer actually existed? Why or why not? Fascinating. Hard to say. I would love to believe that he did exist, but I also like the idea that these stories were told and retold so many times for so long that they just became part of the zeitgeist, and then maybe one random dude, and maybe he was named Homer, or maybe not, maybe he just wrote them down because he knew how to write. That was kind of the key, right? Like, maybe just the right person who knew how to write heard the stories and he wrote them down, and then he gets all the credit. I think it's fascinating, the concept of Homer, and the fact that we'll probably never know whether he really existed or not. But I think ultimately these were stories that were told and retold and passed around regions, and that changed and evolved, and that they just sort of turned into Homer, or that maybe this one person did just put them into words on paper or papyrus or whatever they were writing on then, and that he became so famous for something that probably wasn't really his. What was the Battle of Marathon and the whole origin story of the Olympian marathon all about? This is a basic, but I would love to actually cover that in a more kind of comprehensive way, where I actually do some deep research and don't just go based on what I know off the top of my head. But what I know off the top of my head for now is that the Battle of Marathon was a battle during the Persian invasion, the first, I believe, where the Persians invaded the Greek mainland. It was fought in Marathon by the Athenians and the Plataea, and the Greeks won, which is super cool. They beat the hell out of the Persians. And there was this one guy whose name I won't try to pronounce because it is very ancient Greek. He ran from Marathon to Athens to tell the Athenians that they had won over in Marathon, that they had beat the Persians. He ran all the way there, and he was able to tell the Athenians, and then he dropped dead. And the distance that he ran is the distance of a marathon. And to honor this guy and this incredible thing that he did for the Greeks at that very important and very decisive battle, they honored him by running the marathon. Can I tell you all more about Deus Ex Machina? I would love to. I can say some basic things now, but that's another thing that I'd love to dive into a little bit more as I cover more Greek tragedies. The term Deus Ex Machina is Latin. I won't try to pronounce the Greek version, but the idea is gods in the machinery. So the way it would work is primarily in Greek tragedy, the actual theaters that the ancient Greeks had built, primarily I would think the one in Athens on the side of the Acropolis, because this is where they actually held the contests for the tragedies, where they actually judged, and there was a whole thing. So this theater had this ability. It had this actual construction that was high up above the audience and above the main stage that would transport people. So it would physically move in front of this audience of ancient people. It would move, and it would move these god characters in and out as needed during the play. What makes it so interesting in use of Medea is that she was not a god, and she was not here to save the day or wrap things up or make any kind of godly pronouncements. She was there to announce how fucked up everything was, what she'd just done, and then to fly away on a chariot pulled by dragons. So it's pretty fucked up. And one thing I think I forgot to mention in the episode I did on Medea last week when it comes to this, Euripides didn't win. He got third prize for that play, which is like so fucked up. Euripides was not appreciated in his time in the way that that they should have, and that I think, do now. It's fascinating. Like, he didn't win. Some of his plays, I think I mentioned at one point, were shown after he died, and I think that he got a bit more recognition then. It's all just fascinating. But Euripides, fuck, he was incredible. His mind was incredible, and the stories he chose to tell and the way he chose to tell them, just unbelievably ahead of his time. What is the highest number of sources I have found for a single myth? That's fascinating and a real problem, I would say, in the way I have to tell these things. So, primary sources of ancient Greek myths are few and far between. You have Apollodorus, though it's pretty dry. You have Hesiod, which is even more dry and confusing. You have Homer, and there's certainly a few more, but there aren't a lot. A lot of what we know is compiled by people who were not contemporaries of the ancient Greeks, who were looking back and compiling all these things through translations and through whatever they have found. And so the most of the ways that I have to research the myths are through secondary sources. So somebody like Robert Graves, who, I do try to focus on sources by women, but Robert Graves is a good one for sort of a list. I can usually look in and see, what existed or what kind of sources existed for a certain story, because his are all listed, and then I can kind of dive in from there. But their sources are really, really hard, especially in the mythology, because like I said, there's so many different versions over time. There's hundreds of years in between when they were writing these things down. Everything, the different mythographers back then spanned hundreds of years, so everything changed. There's all these different bits and pieces that you can kind of put together, and that doesn't really answer the question. There's certainly the Circe one is one of the highest number of sources I've ever had to do, because of the different magical sources and the different mythological sources. And it's honestly, I have so much more now than I did when I started this podcast, which is great in terms of sources and in terms of places to look and everything. But I'm constantly finding more and in need of more. If anyone ever has any primary sources they think I haven't discovered or used, please reach out and tell me them, so that I can get a copy if possible. Also, a lot of things are not in print because not everyone is as nerdy, or the translations are out of print, or the translations are incredibly old and therefore really hard to understand. There's so many different issues when it comes to that. It's fascinating and incredibly frustrating. And the last historical kind of question, would I ever do an episode on the Vestal Virgins? Yes, absolutely. Give me time. And the final question, because I'm so touched by it, quote, was there a time when you weren't so vocal about feminism, e.g. silenced or shamed by others or something? How did you get to a point where you're not only not afraid to talk about it, but Athena levels of kick-ass and angry? Signed, someone who is like, fuck yeah, whenever you make a zinger of a point, but is afraid of backlash and admires the crap out of you for laughing in the face of it. Basically, how does one live out loud like you? I wanted to quote that because it feels crazy to me that someone has asked this of me and feels this way about the way I do things. I'm touched and moved and so grateful that it comes across like this. But I think it's an important question because I don't feel that way. I'm constantly afraid. Listening to other badass women rant about similar things, listening to feminists on podcasts and on the internet. I follow a lot of angry feminists on the internet, and I think I've gained a lot of bravery, I could call it, through doing this podcast for as long as I have. I also don't get as much backlash now as when I started, which is kind of crazy to me. I don't really have any people being shitty to me anymore, which is really cool. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm like that at all, but I'm very glad that it comes across like this. I'm angry because it's fucked that we still live in a world like we do, where I can rant about how awful and rapey some of the characters are and then dive right into ranting about the Kavanaugh trial. Like, the idea that I can talk about an ancient world and how fucked up it was and then go straight into how fucked up our world is now is in itself deeply fucked up. It should be so much better now than it is. We shouldn't have to say constantly that we believe women, because that should be the inherent and obvious thing to do when a woman talks about her assault. So I think that anger comes from living a long time, becoming the age that I am, seeing everything for as long as I have. Living in a world with the internet doesn't help. As far as feeling differently before, I don't think I ever felt silenced or shamed. I just think I didn't see it before. I was not always this way when I was younger. I just sort of was indifferent. And I think that it's, I've had some life experiences, as we all have, I'm sure, that have affected me in ways relating to things like that. But I've also just lived long enough to see how far we still have to go, and to realize that if I have this kind of voice online to the world, I'm going to use it in this way. And I love that I can just be an angry, righteous feminist on the internet and have people who, to this day, people contact me about the episode where I talked about Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford. And that's touching to me that people still listen to it and will still reach out to me, because it is fucked up that this is what's going on. And I think that if anyone has a voice in this kind of way, they should be using it for all it's worth. And I hope that I am. And with that just touching question, I'm going to leave it for now. Thank you all for sending them in. If I didn't get to yours, I'm sorry, but thank you. I loved reading all of these. I do want to just note, for the person who asked, am I single? What is it about the way I rant about female empowerment, women and their treatment, and the patriarchy that might suggest to you that I want to be asked that by a random stranger on the internet? I mean, read the room. Thank you all so much for those questions, though. Really, truly, I'm so grateful to have you. I really needed to do this question episode because of a sheer level of overwhelmment, that's not a word, that I've been feeling through work and everything. But I wanted to get this episode out to you guys. And so your wonderful questions really helped me with that. And I hope that this was insightful. I love answering these questions. It sparks ideas in my head that I wouldn't think of otherwise, and gives me ideas for future episodes, just different ways of thinking about things, different ways of delving into the history and all that. It's just fascinating for me, and I hope it is for you too. Thank you all so much. Like I said, taking 2 weeks off, but the next 2 weeks they will have re-airing of Iliad episodes that are appropriate to the forthcoming Aeneid. Otherwise, happy holidays. Thank you all so much for listening. You're truly wonderful. If you could rate, review, subscribe, tell your family about it over the holidays, whatever you may celebrate. Just, spread the word. Let's get more nerds out there talking about mythology in a way that actually focuses on, how fucked up it was and how awful everyone was to each other and how awful the patriarchy is, right? Oh, I'm Liv. I love this shit and I love you all. Thank you.